Over the last week, the CDC published 2 new reports finding that we have worsened the overweight and obesity epidemic as a direct result of our own actions in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. I think it's important to sort of pause and reflect and talk about the details and the findings of these reports, because I'm sure you have people in your life who are seemingly doing everything right to stay safe, yet they're worsening their underlying health conditions that actually make them more vulnerable to severe illness from this current public health challenge and this transmissible respiratory virus, but also make them more vulnerable for chronic conditions like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, depression, and all the sequelae and side effects that are associated with fat gain and visceral fat and the metabolic dysfunction that is associated with elevated levels of body fat that unfortunately are increasing both in children and adults. And we're going to talk about these details and findings from 2 new reports from the CDC. So let's just get into it. And again, normally in these podcasts, I like to share with you positive, uplifting, scientific findings and discoveries and new action tips. And we're just going to talk about this data. And again, it's important. Okay, it's not that it's not important, because we need to scratch our head a little bit and say, gee whiz, is it a good idea to close gyms yet keep fast food restaurants open and donut shops open? And should we have put caution tapes on playgrounds and closed beaches and parks and hiking trails? I mean, these were all things that the experts said are going to help us save lives. Yet we have data here finding that the obesity epidemic is dramatically increasing. There's more and more overweight kids now than ever. Kids actually doubled the rate at which they're gaining weight. And we now know that more and more kids are being hospitalized due to SARS-CoV-2 infections, and we're blaming it on the virus, which it may or may not be linked to the increased transmissibility of the virus. I'm not necessarily arguing that the virus has not changed, but we know data from the UK shows that the case fatality ratio from Delta is actually decreased. Yet here in the US, we're seeing a paradoxical increase in hospitalizations and also deaths in children. Now, when we pause here and talk about the almost doubling at the rate of increase in fat gain in children, especially, unfortunately, children between the ages of 6 and 12, we do know that children have died from COVID-19. There's been a grand total over the last 20 months, and I'm not trying to diminish any loss of life, but there's been all of 460 deaths in children over the last 20 months due to COVID-19. Now, we know that a high percentage of those children have comorbidities and underlying health issues, weight issues, high blood pressure. And again, these are all complications linked and associated with overweight and obesity, right? So we're trying to protect our kids and so forth, yet we've worsened the obesity prevalence in these children. Remember, there's 73 to 75 million children under the age of 19 in this country. So do the math. Do 460 divided by 73 on the low end, 73 million, okay? It's a very small percentage of the children that are really fatally impacted by the virus. Yet when you figure out these numbers here and hear about how dramatic the rate at increase in overweight and obesity is, these are children that will probably never, ever lose that weight. And yet no one seems to care about it. We have, COVID Karen has, hand sanitizer, glued to the kid's backpack and in the lunch is Capri Suns and, Cheese Whiz and Pringles and cupcakes and all this, right? So we're so focused, again, on the acute illnesses, but we really don't pay much attention to these chronic lingering illnesses that, again, are directly related to increased vulnerability from the acute illnesses, but that then the presence of which also directly cause disease and shorten lives and all of this. So it's important to reflect on this and so we can have better conversations with our friends and family who are seemingly doing everything right to stay safe, but are actually gaining weight and worsening their metabolic health, which again is going to take years off their quality adjusted life years. So the title of this report from the CDC is Longitudinal Trends in Body Mass Index Before and During the COVID-19 Pandemic Amongst Persons Aged 2 to 19 Years Old in the US. Okay, so to make a long story short, this is actually the second related study of this, and we covered this 2 weeks ago. If you're interested, you can check it out in the show notes. The article from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that tracked data from Kaiser Permanente hospital visits in children. The title of that, and the findings were actually quite similar. They found a doubling of the rate of increase in overweight and obesity, especially, unfortunately, amongst children in the age group between 5 and 11 years old. So the title of that report, should you be interested in reading that and sharing that with your friends and family, saying, hey, I know you're extra cautious about COVID, but you should probably let your kid go outside and play a little bit here and ride their bike and run and go hiking and do all these things if you really want to keep them safe. Okay, so the title of that paper is Changes in Body Mass Index Amongst Children and Adolescents During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Okay. All right, so carrying on with the CDC paper here, and before we dive into it, I just want to let our new listeners let you know that this is Mike Mutzel. I'm grateful that you are here. If you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button on YouTube. Leave a comment. That tells the algorithm that people that are interested in information like you should see this video, so that really helps us. If you're in iTunes, I just want to thank you for being here. If you can leave us any feedback, that goes a long way. Thank you so much. So let's continue on. Obesity is a serious health concern in the United States, affecting more than 1 in 6 children. Okay, do the math there. What's that, like 15% roughly? 1 in 6, and putting their long-term health and quality of life at risk. Again, we're so worried about keeping safe, but yet when you're overweight, when you're obese, when you're morbidly obese, your quality of life, your mental outlook, depression, and risk for other diseases is much higher. Yet it's almost like we're delaying gratification. We're like, okay, as long as we don't get this acute thing, we'll worry about the diseases and the depression and the mild cognitive impairment and the cancer later, as long as we don't get this one thing right now. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't know about you, but I think two things can be true at once. We can stay safe now, and we can also prevent chronic diseases later. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, children and adolescents spent more time than usual away from structured school settings, and families who were already disproportionately affected by obesity risk factors might have had additional disruptions in income, food, and other social determinants of health. Oh, you mean like those low-income kids that we, trapped in their homes or small apartments and things like that? Oh, that was a bad idea? Oh, you don't say. My gosh. I mean, it was obvious that was terrible, especially for the low-income communities, and especially the online schools and stuff, the rich, the wealthy white children, which all the white moms were on social media reporting. I remember in my community, oh my gosh, there's kids playing basketball. Someone called the police. We have this Facebook group here in our community, and there were so many sort of COVID Karens freaking out about kids playing sports and playing basketball, and I would be the agitator in there and be like, yeah, let them play. Like, kids need to play basketball. Karen, chill out. They're stuck in an apartment, all day, some of these kids, right? I think it's amazing that kids were out playing, but it was really unfortunate that we have scared people so much. There was caution tapes all over park benches and swing sets. It was just ridiculous. So anyway, it's no surprise that we've worsened the obesity epidemic. The article goes on to say, as a result, children and adolescents might have experienced circumstances that accelerated weight gain, including increased stress, irregular meal times, less access to nutritious foods, increased screen time, and fewer options for physical activity. Oh, like no sports. Oh, you mean canceling sports was a bad idea? Oh my gosh, who would have ever thought that? Gee whiz. Okay, so between the pre-pandemic and pandemic periods, the rate of BMI increases approximately doubled. Now, friends, we've talked about this term before, recidivism. What that means is that if you develop overweightness as a child, you don't just miraculously become a lean adult. Doesn't it make sense? You have to work way harder. You ask anyone who's been an overweight, chubby kid, an overweight, chubby teen, and in college, and they have to work their buns off to shed that weight. Your metabolic rate changes and slows down, thyroid hormones. There's a lot going on here. You have stretch marks and the whole thing. So it's better to get out in front of it and prevent obesity and overweightness in children from developing in the first place, starting with nutritious food, starting with walking to school if you can do that, starting with getting your kids involved in sports, starting with unplugging the screens and the technology and getting them outside and moving, hiking and walking as a family. All of these things are helpful. It's not just about sanitization and facial coverings for kids. Believe it or not, there are other things that you can do to keep your kids safe. I know that's shocking to some people, but this is actually true. The rate of BMI increases approximately, and this is a monthly rate, so 0.052 to 1 kilogram per meter squared per month, okay? So there was a doubling in post-pandemic compared to pre-pandemic. Again, for a lot of these kids, that weight is never coming off. That rate it's there, friends, for life, okay? So therefore, that's more low-grade chronic inflammation. We know that the sort of histological changes within the adipocytes and the fat cells, particularly around the abdominal region, start to infiltrate and get influxed with immune cells and macrophages and monocytes and T cells, and they become more inflamed. and you get this chronic smoldering low-grade inflammation. That chronic smoldering low-grade inflammation, you know what it does to your metabolism? It screws it up. The byproducts of this low-grade inflammation induce and create insulin resistance. They create a more thrombotic state so that you're more likely to throw a blood clot and have vascular challenges. They cause endothelial function. So these poor kids being overweight as a young child, and then when they get to sexual maturity, might have things like erectile dysfunction and challenges there, challenges with brain health and mood and cognition. I mean, the list goes on. This is not just benign. Sure, there are people that are overweight and happy-go-lucky, have high-functioning lives. Hats off to them. But the data is quite clear that individuals that are obese, morbidly obese, and overweight have a reduced quality of life, quality-adjusted life years, and have mental health challenges and self-esteem challenges and all that. So again, friends, we have made that worse by locking our kids in their homes and putting masks on them and giving them sanitizer and never allowing them to play with other kids. I mean, it's just a shame. So we have to scratch our head and go, is it worth it? Is it worth it knowing that only 460 children out of a pool of 73 million or 75 million roughly have died? Was it all worth it? Are we going to look back on this and go, damn, we screwed the pooch on this one? My vote is yes. We have really messed this up. And now the good thing is, hopefully we can climb out of this. And that's why I'm sharing this video, to inspire you to nudge your neighbor, your in-laws, your own kids, be like, we gotta take this seriously, friends. Because if you become overweight or obese as a kid, the probability of that weight coming off in one's lifetime is exceedingly low. It's called recidivism. Look it up. It's an unfortunate reality of the situation. So compared with other age groups, children between the ages of 6 and 11 years experience the largest increase in the rate of BMI changes, with a pandemic rate change that was 2.5 times as high as a pre-pandemic rate. Where is the outrage for this dramatic increase in obesity and overweight in young kids? I mean, come on, 6 to 11. We're talking first, second, third, fourth grade. I mean, these poor kids are going to suffer for the rest of their lives because of this 20-month period. They've learned bad habits and screen time and snacking and all of this. I mean, we really got to work better at this. And so here are some, you can see the rate of change, and guess who suffered the worst? It was the kids that were already obese to begin with, followed by the kids that were already overweight to begin with, okay? So we just cranked up the thermostat on the rate at which obesity and fat is accumulating on the body for people that already had challenges. These are especially amongst kids of color, Hispanic and Black. Okay, where's the outrage? Where's the outreach for these kids? Is there any changes in the school lunch menu? We reviewed that the other day for my own daughter, and again, it was Cinnabons and all kinds of junk in there. Researchers go on to say, persons aged 2 to 19 years old with overweight or obesity during the pre-pandemic period experienced significantly higher rates of BMI increases during the pandemic period than did those with healthy weight. So again, just like I said, the people who are already overweight or already obese or already morbidly obese, their condition just worsened, probably due to social isolation and loneliness that has been completely ignored as a facet of health. Again, friends, policies have consequences. We need to look at this holistically and not just throw a sledgehammer. This needs to be a scalpel in terms of our policy decisions going forward. And we need to start to think about these things. So these findings underscore the importance of efforts to prevent excess weight gain during and following the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as during future public health emergencies, including increased access to efforts that promote healthy behaviors. Like, I've been critical of closing gyms since the week that I knew they were going to close in March. Everyone thought I was a grandma killer. I was insensitive. I had all these people saying, just buy a Peloton, bro. Like, oh yeah, it's that easy. Just flip it on. Buy a $3,000 bike. Come on. It's not probable. It's not realistic. There's other benefits in terms of the people you see at the gym, the connections and the whole thing. So why did we close gyms? Not only once, at least in the state of Washington, we closed them twice. We close them, open them, close them again. Okay, terrible policy. Again, the unintended harms of this. I mean, there's countries now that have had gyms closed. People that, say rented out. I know several families who rented out an apartment or own a condo because it had a fitness facility. Well, guess what? For a lot of people, that fitness facility was closed for like a year and a half. Okay, imagine what that did to the mental health, to the blood sugar, to the sleep, to the sex life, to obesity and the whole thing. Why did we do that? That was just so dumb. Now, I know it doesn't really do us much good to criticize bad policy that has already happened, but we need to realize that we cannot do this again because winter's coming. And so when policymakers or your hotel gym or your gym in your condo or your HOA or whatever tries to do this, you need to be able to remember this video and be like, no, bad. No, you are making people more unhealthy by doing some of that stuff. So it's important now. Now, this wasn't a small data set. This wasn't like 13 kids, from 3 schools. This was 432,000 participants and there was a total of 2.5 million BMI measurements tracked between January of 2018 and November 30th of 2020. So this is a long duration sort of study. Now, again, so those were 2 studies in children that we've reviewed, one from JAMA, one from the CDC. The CDC also reported that obesity rates have increased in the U.S. I'll be darned. I mean, who would have ever thought that? We scared people into staying in their homes and not socializing. We reduced access to gyms and all that. Well, it turns out that we have increased the rates of obesity from 9 states to now 16 states have obese adults, greater than 35% of the population. So we knew Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware is a new state. Delaware, congrats, Delaware. You have now joined the club where 35% of your residents are now obese. Come on, people should be outraged by this news. Indiana, and then Iowa is new this year. So Iowa now has 35% of its population is obese, probably thanks to locking people in their homes and closing parks and all this sort of stuff. Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, all that. But here's what's new in this year. Thanks to COVID, Ohio, congratulations. Now 35% of all of your adults that live in your state are now obese. Was it worth it? Was it worth it to close the parks and the gyms and keep people in their homes? I think, honestly, I do not think so. Okay, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas now is new. Now that's kind of a surprise. I would have thought that Texas would have been one of those states with a high percentage of obesity, but it's now joined the obese club. So we're seeing, again, this problem, we're making it worse. And the rate at which we are making it worse is increasing. We've cranked up, we've accelerated this, unfortunately, friends. So let's continue on here. Adults with obesity, I'm sorry, I forgot one state, West Virginia. So West Virginia is in there as well. And I'll link this in the show notes and so forth and the timestamps so you can see this. So the CDC goes on to say adults with obesity are at an increased risk for many other serious health conditions such as heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, some cancers, and poor mental health. And I will say that individuals with obesity are also at increased risk for having a suboptimal immunization response. Individuals with obesity are also at increased risk for being hospitalized, for having severe COVID, and dying from COVID. So we should be outraged. If we're serious about saving lives, this news should really piss people off. This news should be more impetus to never close parks and close gyms. This news we should be offering incentives for our citizens and people in our neighborhood and people we care about to lose weight. That's what this news should be, but this didn't even make any news. I tried to search for it before I started. So individuals should regularly talk with their healthcare provider about their body mass index, family history of chronic disease, current lifestyle, and health risks. Okay, friends. Now, there's yet another report that we talked about. I'm not going to talk about it here because if you want to check it out, I'll link it in the show notes. But new research uncovers concerning increases in youth living with diabetes in the U.S. We found that there was a dramatic worsening of type 1 and type 2 diabetes over the last year as well. So we got obesity increasing in both children and adults, overweight increasing in both those, and type 2 diabetes, okay? Like I said, wearing a mask is not the only thing you can do to save lives, okay? We can stop eating hyperpalatable, ultra-processed foods. We can end the subsidies that make that Happy Meal with a milkshake and the whole thing, chicken nuggets, $3.99, right? That meal really should probably be costing like $15.99. But thanks to subsidies, we now have increased the access and the affordability of these really bad calories that are worsening the vulnerability for our citizens and putting a strain on our healthcare system. We're talking about overfilled hospitals. We hear it on the news all the time, how in the South, in Missouri, in Louisiana, all these hospitals are stuffed and overfilled. Well, then why aren't we upset for all the advertising and all the subsidized dollars that make the obesogenic phenotype that are burdening the healthcare system and burdening people. There should be equal outrage, but it's really biased. Our response, unfortunately, is really biased, friends. So in our last few minutes here, what can you do? What are some 3 or 4 simple things you can do? Okay. You can get up in the morning and go for a walk. Everyone can go for a walk, friends. Get up a little bit earlier, go for a 10 or 15 minute walk. If it's raining, get a rain jacket. Invest in a rain jacket. Eat when the sun's out only. Don't eat after dark. This is called time-restricted feeding, okay? Animals in nature do this all the time, okay? We know, watch what chickens do when it starts. Their feeding window, actually, I wanted to share this. Their feeding window changes with the seasons, and so should your feeding window. So we need to eat when the sun's out, fast when it's dark. Try to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. That makes a huge difference. For those of you that test your glucose, you know that if you go to bed at 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. on the weekends, and your normal bedtime, say 10 or 11, you know the next day your glucose and your hunger hormones are all skewed. Okay, so be very consistent with that. Try to hit every major muscle group with resistance training. It can be body weight, it can be push-ups, it can be pull-ups. We all have access to going to parks. We can get a TRX, invest like $40, $50 in some bands, and you can do this at home. So that's really important. Prioritize your protein and cut out the carbohydrates if you're not extremely physically active. I mean, these are just simple things that we could do for our kids. I now bring my daughter with me to the gym. She's 9. We bike every day to school, rain or shine. It was pouring rain this morning. We were out there biking, and all the other kids are in their cars with their face masks on their phone. Mommy's driving them around, keeping them safe, but they're not exercising, okay? So I would like you to be, this is how we can be part of the solution and not be part of the problem, friends. So let's make healthy living great again, friends. I'm grateful that you're tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, this podcast. I will link some of the articles that we talked about in the show notes. We got to do better. We got to think better. We can make America and the world healthier, one step at a time with small actionable tips. So thank you as always for being here, and we will catch you on a future video and podcast down the road. Bye now.